Hello again, everyone, and welcome. I'm so glad you've decided to join me here again tonight. There is a certain quiet magic that lives in the borderlands of our world, in the deep, shaded places of the forest, at the foot of ancient trees. It's a magic not of spells or fantasy, but of biology, of intricate, silent partnerships and chemical conversations that have been taking place for millions of years, long before we ever walked this earth. Tonight, we're going to venture into that world. We're going to talk about an organism that seems to have been lifted directly from the pages of a fairy tale, an icon of the woodland realm, with its scarlet cap and snow-white spots. It is perhaps the most famous and most misunderstood mushroom in the world, the Fly Agaric, Amanita Muscaria. We're going to explore its remarkable life, not as a myth, but as a masterpiece of evolution. As always, if you find some comfort or peace in what we do here, a simple click of the like or subscribe button is more than enough to let me know. It means the world. And tonight, I'd love to know, in the comments, tell me about the most beautiful or striking mushroom you've ever seen in the wild. Where were you? What did it look like? It's lovely to imagine our quiet community, scattered all across the globe, sharing these small moments of natural wonder. But for now, that can wait. The time for scrolling is over. Let's begin our ritual of rest. I want you to find that perfect, comfortable spot. Dim the lights if you haven't already. Let your head feel heavy and supported on your pillow. Take a slow, deep breath in, and as you exhale, feel the tension of the day begin to melt away from your shoulders, from your back, from your mind. Let my voice be a gentle guide, something to simply follow as you drift. There is nothing else you need to do. We are going to shrink down, you and I, leaving the busy human world behind. We're heading to the forest floor, to the world of damp earth and moss and deep, quiet roots, to meet a truly extraordinary resident. Chapter 1. The Scarlet Oracle, Biology and Ecology of the Fly Agaric. Our story doesn't begin with that famous red cap. It doesn't begin with anything you can see at all. To truly understand the Fly Agaric, we have to go underground, into the cool, dark, and living soil. Here, beneath the carpet of fallen pine needles and decaying leaves, exists another world, a hidden kingdom. This is the realm of the mycelium. Imagine, for a moment, a single microscopic spore from a mushroom landing on a patch of damp earth. It is a tiny vessel of potential, a biological starting pistol. When the conditions are just right, the perfect humidity, the right temperature, the presence of certain nutrients, this spore germinates. It doesn't sprout a stem or a leaf. Instead, it sends out a single, impossibly fine thread-like filament. This filament is called a hypha. It is a pale, translucent tube, a living, growing strand of cells arranged end to end, pushing its way through the microscopic pores and channels of the soil. This single hypha is the beginning of everything. It grows, branching and rebranching, seeking out moisture and nutrients. It meets other hypha that have germinated from other compatible spores, and in a moment of silent chemical recognition, they fuse. This fusion, this joining of two parent strands, creates a new organism, a genetically distinct individual, and from this point, the real work begins. The network explodes. This sprawling, interconnected web of hyphae is the mycelium. It is the true body of the fungus. The mushroom we see above ground is merely the fruit, the temporary reproductive structure. The living, breathing, feeding organism is this vast subterranean network. It is less like a plant's root system and more like a combination of a city's circulatory system and its fiber optic internet grid. It is a biological network of breathtaking complexity. These hyphal threads, each one just a few micrometers in diameter, weave their way through the soil with a kind of slow, deliberate intelligence. The very tip of each growing hypha, called the apex, is a marvel of biological engineering. It releases a cocktail of powerful enzymes into the soil ahead of it. These are digestive juices, tailored to break down the complex organic matter of the forest floor, the tough lignin and cellulose of fallen wood, the intricate proteins of a dead insect. The mycelium doesn't ingest its food, it performs external digestion. It dissolves its world around it, and then absorbs the simplified life-giving nutrients directly through its cell walls. It is a patient, silent, and incredibly efficient decomposer, one of the master recyclers of the forest. The network grows, sometimes for years, decades, or even centuries, spreading outward in all directions. A single individual, Amanita muscaria, mycelial network can span many acres, a hidden giant sleeping just beneath the forest floor. It connects tree to tree, root to root, becoming an inseparable part of the very fabric of the woodland ecosystem. It senses moisture gradients, avoids toxins, and hunts for pockets of nutrition with a persistence that is humbling. It is a decentralized organism, with no brain, no central command, and yet it behaves as a cohesive, intelligent whole, processing information about its environment and responding in a coordinated way. It is the quiet, foundational consciousness of the soil. But Amanita muscaria is not just a decomposer. It has evolved a far more elegant and profound way of making a living. It is a diplomat, a trader, a partner. It is a mycorrhizal fungus, and this is perhaps the most beautiful part of its story. As its mycelial threads explore the soil, they don't just search for dead matter, they seek out the living. Specifically, they seek out the fine, delicate root tips of certain trees. In the northern hemisphere, its preferred partners are most often members of the birch family, the pine family, and sometimes spruce. When a hyphal tip encounters a compatible tree root, a remarkable and ancient negotiation begins. The fungus doesn't attack the root, it doesn't parasitize it. Instead, it forms one of the most successful and widespread symbiotic relationships on our planet. The hypha begin to weave a dense, felt-like sheath or mantle around the outside of the fine rootlet, like a soft, living glove. From this mantle, a complex network of hypha penetrates the root itself, but it does so with incredible surgical precision. It doesn't break into the root cells. Instead, it weaves its way between them, creating an intricate interface known as the Hartig net. This interface, this Hartig net, is the marketplace. It is the site of a grand subterranean trade agreement that benefits both the fungus and the tree. The tree, through the miracle of photosynthesis in its leaves, creates sugars, carbon-rich energy that fuels its growth. But trees are often limited by their ability to acquire other essential nutrients from the soil, particularly phosphorus and nitrogen, which are often locked up in forms that are difficult for tree roots to absorb. And this is where the fungus reveals its genius. The mycelial network is vastly more extensive and infinitely finer than the tree's root system. It can explore a volume of soil hundreds, even thousands of times larger than the roots can reach alone. Its powerful enzymes can unlock those recalcitrant nutrients, breaking down complex organic molecules and mining minerals that are inaccessible to the tree. Through the Hartig net, the fungus passes a steady stream of water, nitrogen, phosphorus, and other vital micronutrients directly to its tree partner. It is, in effect, a vast extended root system for the tree, increasing its absorptive surface area by an astonishing amount. In return for this invaluable service, the tree pays a handsome price. It shunts a significant portion of its hard-won sugars, sometimes up to 20 or 30% of the total energy it produces from sunlight, down through its trunk, through its roots, and directly into the fungal network. The fungus cannot produce its own food. It is not a plant. It is entirely dependent on this trade for its survival. This is not a simple transaction. It is a co-evolutionary dance, millions of years in the making. The fungus and the tree are no longer two separate organisms, but a single functional unit, a composite being often called a mycorrhiza, which literally means fungus root. The health of the Amanita is tied to the health of the birch. The vitality of the pine is dependent on the vitality of the mycelium. They are inextricably linked. Walking through a birch or pine forest, what we see as a collection of individual trees is in reality a connected superorganism, linked underground by a shared fungal network. This network can even pass resources between trees, shuttling carbon from a well-lit mother tree to a shaded sapling, or sending warning signals about insect attacks from one tree to its neighbors. Amanita muscaria is not just a mushroom in the forest. It is a vital part of the forest's plumbing, its economy, and its communication system. For months, or even years, this is the entire existence of the Fly Agaric. This silent, hidden life of growth, decomposition, and symbiotic trade. But when the conditions are perfect, something remarkable is triggered. This usually happens in late summer and autumn, after a period of good rain has saturated the soil and the temperature begins to cool. The vast mycelial network, having gathered and stored enough energy from its tree partner, decides it is time to reproduce. Deep in the soil, at countless nodes within the network, the hyphae begin to knot together. They weave and fuse, differentiating and specializing, forming a tiny, dense, spherical bundle of tissue. This is the primordium, the mushroom in miniature. It is a tightly packed knot of potential, containing all the genetic information and cellular machinery needed to become the fruiting body we know so well. This tiny sphere, at first no bigger than a pinhead, begins to absorb water and nutrients from the surrounding mycelium, swelling and pushing its way upward through the soil. As it grows, it is completely encased in a protective membrane called the universal veil. This veil is like a soft white shell, an eggshell of fungal tissue that protects the developing mushroom from the abrasive soil and from drying out. And so what first breaks the surface of the forest floor is not a mushroom with a cap and stem, but this smooth, white, egg-like structure. It pushes up through the moss and pine needles, looking for all the world like a puffball or a strange subterranean egg laid by some woodland creature. Inside this egg, the mushroom is rapidly developing. The stem, or stipe, is elongating, and the tiny button-like cap, or pileus, is forming at its apex. It is a period of incredible, accelerated growth. The mushroom doesn't grow in the same way a plant does, by slowly adding cells. Instead, its cells, already formed in the primordium, simply inflate with water, a process driven by osmotic pressure. The mushroom acts like a hydraulic pump, drawing water from the mycelium and forcing it into the cells of the fruiting body, causing it to expand with astonishing speed. It is not uncommon for a Fly Agaric to go from a subterranean knot to a fully emerged egg in just a day or two. Then comes the moment of revelation. As the stipe inside continues to elongate, it pushes upward with incredible force, eventually rupturing the universal veil. This breaking of the shell is the mushroom's birth into the world of light and air. The top of the veil is carried upward on the expanding cap, while the base of the veil is left behind in the soil, forming a cup-like structure at the bottom of the stipe, known as a vulva. This vulva is a key identifying feature of the Amanita genus, a remnant of its origins, a reminder of the egg from which it hatched. As the scarlet cap expands, stretching outward like a parasol opening in the rain, the white fragments of the universal veil that were stuck to its surface are stretched and broken apart. They become the iconic snow-white to yellowish warts or patches that speckle the cap. These are not spots of color, they are physical remnants of its protective swaddling clothes. The pattern they form is random, unique to each mushroom. Heavy rain can sometimes wash them away, leaving a pure, unblemished scarlet cap, which can sometimes confuse identification. Simultaneously, another layer of protective tissue, the partial veil, which covered the delicate developing gills on the underside of the cap, also breaks. As the cap expands, this veil tears away from the cap's margin, leaving a delicate skirt-like ring or annulus around the upper part of the stipe. This ring is another beautiful, ephemeral remnant of the mushroom's development, and so it stands revealed, a perfect specimen of Amanita muscaria. The stipe is firm and white, often with concentric rings of shaggy texture near the base from the remnants of the vulva. The annulus hangs like a delicate skirt, and above it all, the magnificent cap. It is a brilliant, arresting shade of scarlet or vermilion red, a color that seems almost impossibly vivid against the muted greens and browns of the forest floor. The color itself is a warning, a biological signal known as aposematism. Like the bright stripes of a wasp or the vibrant skin of a poison dart frog, this color is not an invitation. It is a declaration, a billboard advertising its toxicity to any foraging animal that might be tempted to take a bite. It says, "I am not for you. Eating me will have consequences." The pigments responsible for this spectacular display are not related to the anthocyanins that make apples red or the carotenoids that make carrots orange. They are a unique class of compounds called betalains, specifically muscaflavin, which is yellow, and muscapurpurin, which is reddish-purple. The precise combination of these and other related pigments gives the mushroom its characteristic hue. What's fascinating is that these pigments are synthesized from the same biochemical precursor as one of the mushroom's primary neurotoxins, ibotenic acid. It's a beautiful example of nature's frugality, using one chemical pathway to create both a warning signal and the very thing it's warning about. Beneath the cap, radiating out from the stipe like the spokes of a wheel, are the gills. They are pristine white, delicate, and crowded closely together. This is the mushroom's true purpose, the reason for this entire, elaborate, and fleeting display. The surface of each one of these hundreds of gills is lined with millions upon millions of microscopic, club-shaped structures called basidia, and at the tip of each basidium, 4 even tinier structures are born, the spores. These spores are the seeds of the next generation. They are infinitesimally small, smooth, and white. When the mushroom is mature, these spores are released from the gills by the billion. They are so light that they are carried on the slightest breath of wind, a fine white powder that drifts invisibly through the forest. The mushroom's shape, the classic parasol, is no accident. It is an aerodynamic marvel, perfectly designed to allow air currents to flow around it in such a way that it creates a gentle lift, helping to suck the spores out from between the gills and disperse them as widely as possible. The vast majority of these spores will perish. They will land on unsuitable ground, be eaten by microscopic organisms, or fail to find a compatible mate. But a tiny, statistically insignificant fraction will land in the perfect spot, near the root of a suitable host tree, and the entire slow, silent cycle will begin once more. The germination of a hypha, the search for a partner, the slow growth of the mycelial web, the ancient pact with the tree roots, and the patient wait for the perfect moment to once again send a scarlet messenger up into the world of air. The mushroom itself, the beautiful fruiting body, will last only a few days. It will soon be consumed by slugs, snails, and insects, creatures that seem to be immune to its toxins, or it will simply decay, melting back into the forest floor, its brief, glorious mission complete. This cycle of life plays out across a vast geographical stage. Amanita muscaria is a truly cosmopolitan species, native to the coniferous and deciduous woodlands throughout the temperate and boreal regions of the northern hemisphere. It is a common sight in the birch forests of Siberia, the pine barrens of North America, and the spruce-fir woodlands of Europe. Its deep ancestral connection is with these ecosystems. However, in the age of global trade and travel, this quintessential woodland mushroom has become an accidental tourist. Because its mycelium lives in such intimate association with the root balls of its host trees, it has been inadvertently transported around the world with horticultural stock. Pine and birch trees, valued for their timber and beauty, have been planted in places like Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, and South America, and with them, hidden in the soil around their roots, travelled the dormant mycelium of the Fly Agaric. In these new lands, it has become an invasive species. It has escaped the plantations and begun to form new mycorrhizal relationships with native trees, such as the southern beech in New Zealand. Its incredible adaptability has allowed it to thrive, sometimes to the detriment of native fungal species. And as it has spread, it has also revealed its genetic diversity. The classic fairy tale mushroom, the deep scarlet red with brilliant white warts, is primarily the Eurasian variety. Amanita muscaria var. Muscaria. But if you were walking through a forest in the eastern United States, you might encounter Amanita muscaria var. Gesawi, whose cap is a beautiful shade of yellow to peachy orange with yellowish warts. On the west coast, you might find var. Flavovolvata, which has a reddish cap but a distinctly yellow-tinged vulva and veil remnants. These are not different species but regional variations, subspecies that have evolved subtle differences in appearance and perhaps even chemistry over millennia of geographical separation. They are all members of the same, widespread and adaptable family, each one a testament to the mushroom's long and successful evolutionary journey. Now, we must address the most famous and most critical aspect of this mushroom's biology, its chemistry. The vibrant red color, as we discussed, is a warning, and the warning is a legitimate one. Amanita muscaria is a poisonous mushroom. However, the nature of its poison is profoundly different from that of its more notorious relatives, and this distinction is absolutely crucial. Within the Amanita genus, there are some of the most deadly organisms on the planet. The destroying angel, Amanita bisporigera, or Amanita ocreata, and the death cap, Amanita phallodes, contain a class of toxins known as amatoxins. These are devastatingly potent poisons that work by inhibiting an essential enzyme in our cells called RNA polymerase II. This effectively shuts down protein synthesis, leading to a slow, agonizing cellular death, particularly in the liver and kidneys. Ingesting even a small portion of a death cap can be, and often is, fatal. The Fly Agaric, Amanita muscaria, does not contain these deadly amatoxins. Its toxicity comes from a completely different set of compounds that act not on the body's cells, but on the central nervous system. The two principal active compounds are ibotenic acid and Muscimol. Ibotenic acid is the primary neurotoxin found in the fresh mushroom. Structurally, it is very similar to glutamic acid, which is the precursor to one of the brain's most important excitatory neurotransmitters, glutamate. Because of this similarity, ibotenic acid can bind to glutamate receptors in the brain, essentially overstimulating them. This can lead to a range of unpleasant symptoms, including confusion, agitation, profuse sweating, nausea, and loss of coordination. It is an excitotoxin, putting parts of the nervous system into overdrive. But a fascinating chemical transformation can occur. When the mushroom is dried, or cooked, or even metabolized within the human body, the ibotenic acid undergoes a process called decarboxylation. A small piece of the molecule, a carboxyl group, breaks off. This seemingly minor change transforms ibotenic acid into a completely different compound, Muscimol. Muscimol is the primary psychoactive component of the Fly Agaric, and its effect on the brain is the polar opposite of ibotenic acids. Muscimol's structure is very similar to another of the brain's key neurotransmitters, GABA, gamma-aminobutyric acid. GABA is the brain's primary inhibitory neurotransmitter. Its job is to calm things down, to reduce neuronal excitability throughout the nervous system, acting as a kind of brake. Because Muscimol is a structural mimic of GABA, it can bind to the same GABA receptors in the brain and activate them. It is a potent GABA-A agonist. This widespread inhibition of the central nervous system is what produces the mushroom's most famous and profound effects. It can cause sedation, dreamlike states, a distorted perception of size and distance, what some call macropsia and micropsia, synesthesia, the mixing of senses, and a feeling of being disconnected from one's own body. It slows the brain down, leading to a state that is not a classic psychedelic trip like that from psilocybin mushrooms, but something altogether different, a deliriant or hypnotic state, often leading to a deep comatose-like sleep filled with vivid, bizarre dreams. The ratio of ibotenic acid to muscimol can vary greatly from mushroom to mushroom, depending on the region, the season, and how it is prepared. This variability is what makes its effects so unpredictable. A fresh mushroom, rich in ibotenic acid, might produce a much more physically unpleasant and agitating experience. A carefully dried mushroom, in which much of the ibotenic acid has converted to muscimol, might produce a more sedative and dreamlike one. It's this unique pharmacology that sets the stage for the Fly Agaric's long and deeply strange relationship with humanity. It is not a simple poison, nor is it a simple entheogen. It is something in between, a chemical key that unlocks a very particular and often bewildering door in the human mind. Its biology, from the hidden mycelial web trading nutrients with the roots of an ancient pine, to the specific way its molecules mimic the brain's own chemistry, is a single continuous story. It is a story of partnership, of warning, of transformation, and of a beauty so striking it seems to call out to us from another world, a world that is, in reality, right here, silently flourishing, just beneath our feet. And as we continue our journey, we will see how this scarlet oracle of the forest has spoken to us, in our myths, our rituals, and our stories, for thousands of years. But for now, just rest in the knowledge of this quiet, complex life, the slow, patient work happening in the dark soil, the ancient binding contract between fungus and tree, the brilliant fleeting announcement of the mushroom's arrival and its silent chemical secrets. Chapter 2: Echoes of the Shaman, a global history of myth and ritual. Those silent chemical secrets did not remain locked away in the mushroom's crimson cap forever. For as long as we have walked through the forests of this world, we have been curious observers, cataloguers of the useful and the strange. And there is little in the temperate forests of the northern hemisphere more strange, more arresting to the eye, than a perfect Amanita Muscaria pushing its way through the dark soil. Before we had the language of chemistry, of ibotenic acid and muscimol, we had the language of spirit, of myth, and of magic. The mushroom's effects on the human mind were not a neurological event, but a communion. It was a bridge, a key, a doorway to a world that hummed just beneath the surface of our own. To understand the deep cultural roots of this fungus, we must travel far from the manicured lawns and tea parties of Victorian England, back in time and across the globe, to the vast windswept taiga of Siberia. Here, under the endless sky and amidst the birch and pine, the story of our relationship with the Fly Agaric begins not in a book, but in the breath of a shaman, chanted into the smoky air of a yurt. Imagine a world blanketed in snow for much of the year, a world of immense, profound silence, broken only by the howl of the wind, the crack of a frozen branch, or the soft tread of reindeer. For peoples like the Koryak, the Evenki, and the Khanty, survival was an intricate dance with the forces of nature, a partnership built on respect and deep listening. In this world, the veil between the physical and the spiritual was thin, permeable. The health of the tribe, the success of the hunt, the location of the herds, all were believed to be influenced by a complex world of spirits, ancestors and deities that inhabited the rivers, the mountains and the sky. But this other world was not easily accessible. It required a guide, an interpreter, a soul walker who could travel between the realms to seek guidance, to heal the sick, and to restore balance. This was the role of the shaman. The shaman was not a priest, reciting fixed doctrine from a book. They were more of a spiritual engineer, a doctor of the soul, a living bridge. And for many of these cultures, one of their most powerful and sacred tools for crossing that bridge was the wopak, the Koryak name for Amanita muscaria. The mushroom was not seen as a mere plant, but as a conscious entity, a spirit in its own right. It was a non-human person, a teacher who offered a way to see with more than just your eyes. The respect afforded to it was immense. One does not simply stumble upon the wopak and eat it. Its collection and consumption were wrapped in layers of intricate ritual, a sacred conversation between human and fungus that began long before the mushroom was ever ingested. The shaman, or sometimes a designated young woman, would go into the forest to seek it out. When a cluster was found, there would be prayers, offerings, songs of gratitude to the mushroom spirits for revealing themselves. They were harvested with care, their scarlet caps like jewels against the muted greens and browns of the forest floor. Back in the settlement, they would be prepared. Often they were simply laid out to dry, shriveling and concentrating their power under the weak Arctic sun or in the warmth of the yurt. The drying process is not just for preservation, it's a crucial chemical step. As we now know, the gentle heat helps convert the more volatile and nauseating ibotenic acid into the more stable psychoactive compound Muscimol. The shamans didn't know the chemistry, but through generations of trial and error of careful empirical observation, they perfected the pharmacology. They knew the mushroom's secrets through experience. The ritual itself was a communal event, often taking place in the dark of the long winter nights. Inside the yurt, a central fire would crackle, casting dancing shadows on the hide walls. The air would be thick with the smell of wood smoke and dried herbs. The shaman would don their ceremonial attire, a coat heavy with iron charms, mirrors and ribbons, each piece a tool, a prayer, a piece of spiritual armor for the journey ahead. They would beat a drum, its steady, hypnotic rhythm, the heartbeat of the ritual, the sound that would carry their spirit out of their body. And then they would consume the mushrooms. Sometimes 3, sometimes 7, sometimes more, the dose carefully considered. The rest of the tribe would be present, not as spectators, but as anchors, their chanting and support forming a vessel of sound to hold the shamans safe on their metaphysical journey. What happened next was described not as a hallucination, but as a flight. The shaman's soul was said to leave the body, to ascend or descend the world tree, the cosmic axis that connected the different layers of reality. In their cosmology, our world was just the middle world. Above was the upper world, the realm of creators and high gods. Below was the lower world, the home of ancestors and spirits of the earth. The shaman would travel to these places to plead a case for a sick person, to find the lost soul of a child, or to ask the spirits where the reindeer herds had gone. The descriptions of these journeys are fascinating. They often involved a sense of scale distortion, of macropsia and micropsia, where objects would appear immense or infinitesimally small. The shaman might feel they could step over a mountain or hold a forest in the palm of their hand. They would converse with animal spirits, with the souls of rivers and stones, and with the mushroom spirits themselves, who often appeared as small, red-capped figures guiding them through the spirit world. It's not a great leap to see how these ancient experiences passed down through oral tradition could be the very bedrock of later folklore about gnomes and elves. This experience was not always pleasant. It could be terrifying, a battle with malevolent spirits in a landscape of shifting, incomprehensible forms. It was a perilous duty, and the shaman undertook it for the good of their people. When they returned, often hours later, exhausted and drenched in sweat, they would bring back the knowledge they had gained, the location of the caribou, the herb needed to cure an illness, the nature of the taboo that had been broken and needed to be set right. They returned with wisdom, and here we come to one of the most discussed and often misunderstood aspects of this ancient practice, the symbiotic relationship with reindeer. Reindeer, or caribou, are one of the few animals that actively seek out and consume Amanita muscaria. They seem to enjoy its effects and are not poisoned by it. The Siberian peoples who lived their lives in such close proximity to these animals would have observed this for millennia. The reindeer were their source of food, clothing, tools, and transport. They were the very center of their material and spiritual world. The sight of their most sacred animal consuming their most sacred plant would not have gone unnoticed. It would have been seen as a profound endorsement, a sign from the spirit world that this mushroom was a powerful gift. This observation led to a unique practice that can seem startling to the modern mind, the ritual drinking of urine. The human body is a remarkable filter. When a person consumes the Fly Agaric, our kidneys process the compounds. Much of the ibotenic acid is broken down, but the key psychoactive compound, Muscimol, passes through the body largely unchanged and is excreted in the urine. The shamans discovered that a person could drink the urine of someone who had consumed the mushroom and experience a powerful psychoactive journey but with fewer of the negative physical side effects like nausea or muscle twitching that can come from eating the raw fungus. The body of the shaman became the crucible, refining the mushroom's spirit for others. This was not a casual act, it was a sacred communion. The spirit of the mushroom was believed to be passed from person to person, a way of sharing the divine experience. The shaman, having taken the most potent initial dose, would share the refined essence with others in the tribe. It was a way of extending the vision, of allowing others a glimpse into the world the shaman had just visited. It was the ultimate act of recycling, a closed loop of spiritual energy within the community, mirroring the nutrient cycles they saw in the forest all around them. The reindeer, in their own way, participated in this cycle. It has been documented that reindeer are attracted to the urine of humans who have eaten the mushrooms and will seek it out. A human might relieve themselves in the snow only to have a reindeer eagerly consume it. A person could then in turn drink the urine of that reindeer. It's a staggering multi-species feedback loop of a psychoactive compound, a chemical conversation flowing between fungus, human, and animal, woven into the very fabric of Arctic life. It sounds bizarre to us, but to them it was a deeply logical and spiritual symbiosis, a perfect expression of their interconnected worldview. The symbolism of the shamanic flight, powered by the red and white mushroom, is thought by many scholars to be one of the deep hidden roots of a much more recent myth. Think of a figure, dressed in red and white, who is known for his ability to fly through the sky with the aid of reindeer. A magical figure who lives in the far north and can bring gifts of wisdom or joy. A figure who is associated with a specific night in the deep of winter, when the sun is at its weakest. The shamanic journey, it is theorized, is the ancient cultural template for the story of Santa Claus. The idea of entering a home through the chimney, for instance, could echo the practice of entering and exiting the winter yurts, which were often buried in snow, through a smoke hole in the roof. The gifts brought were not toys, but healing and knowledge from another world. This is not to say that a Siberian shaman is Santa Claus, of course, but that the powerful archetypes of his story, the flying reindeer, the red and white suit, the magical journey from the north, may be faint echoes, distant memories of these ancient and powerful rituals, filtered through centuries and cultures, until only the faintest symbolic resonance remains. As we move away from the stark, snow-covered landscapes of Siberia, and travel south and west into the temperate forests of Europe, the story of the Fly Agaric changes. The mushroom remains the same, its chemistry unaltered, but the human perception of it shifts dramatically. The awe and reverence of the shamanic cultures begin to curdle into suspicion, fear, and eventually a kind of whimsical trivialization. Here the mushroom isn't a vehicle to the heavens, but a doorway to a much closer, more mischievous, and sometimes malevolent world, the world of the fairies, the elves, and the gnomes. The iconic image of the Fly Agaric is perhaps more deeply rooted in European folklore than anywhere else. It is the fairy tale mushroom, the one you see in illustrations for the stories of the Brothers Grimm, the archetypal toadstool upon which a gnome might sit, fishing in a forest stream. This association is so strong, it feels almost innate. But why? The connection is twofold, weaving together the mushroom's appearance, its environment, and its psychoactive effects into a rich tapestry of folk belief. First, there is the phenomenon of the fairy ring. You may have seen one yourself, a near-perfect circle of mushrooms sprouting up in a meadow or a forest clearing. To the scientific mind, this is a beautiful and straightforward process. It is the visible expression of a single organism, a mycelial network growing underground. The network expands outwards from a central point in a roughly circular pattern. When it has gathered enough nutrients and the conditions are right, it sends up its fruiting bodies, the mushrooms, at the outer edges of this expanding circle. The result is a living ring that can grow for years, sometimes centuries, widening by a few inches or more each season. But to our ancestors, living in a world without microscopes, a world animated by unseen forces, such a perfect and spontaneous circle appearing overnight was anything but natural. It was supernatural. It was clear evidence of another world intersecting with our own. These rings were seen as portals, as the dancing grounds of fairies, elves, or sprites. It was believed that on moonlit nights, the fae folk would gather in these rings to dance in revelry. Woe to any human who stumbled into the circle while the dancing was underway. The stories warned you could be forced to dance until you died of exhaustion, or be whisked away to the fairy realm for 100 years, only to return for what felt like a single night. Stepping into a fairy ring was a taboo, a transgression, and very often the mushrooms that formed these potent magical circles were the vibrant, unmistakable Fly Agarics. They were the sentinels, the markers of a sacred and dangerous space. Then there is the mushroom's appearance itself. Its life cycle seems magical. It emerges from the soil so rapidly, a brilliant red dome pushing through the pine needles, swelling and opening like a secret being revealed. In its young stage, the universal veil covers it in white, warty spots, giving it a speckled, otherworldly look. As it grows, the cap expands and the spots spread out. To a mind primed to see spirits in nature, it is not just a fungus, it is a tiny enchanted house. It's a stool for a pixie. It is an object that simply looks like it belongs in a story. Its bright red color is a warning in nature, a signal of potency, of danger, and of power. In a forest of greens and browns, it is a shout. The psychoactive properties of the mushroom are the final, crucial thread in this web of folklore. While there is less direct evidence of widespread ritualistic use in Europe compared to Siberia, it's almost certain that people did consume it, whether intentionally or accidentally. Imagine a medieval farmer or a woodsman living a life of hardship and toil who ingests this mushroom. He experiences the same shifts in perception, the same distortions of scale and time as the Siberian shaman. He doesn't have the cultural framework of a world tree or spirit guides. Instead, he interprets his experience through the lens of his own local folklore. When he experiences macropsia and the world around him seems gigantic, he might feel that he has shrunk, that he has become as small as a gnome or a pixie. When he experiences macropsia and the world seems tiny, he may feel like a giant, striding over a miniature landscape. The vivid colors, the geometric patterns, the sense of an animating spirit in all things, these would be interpreted as seeing the hidden machinery of the world, catching a glimpse of the little people who were believed to manage the affairs of the forest, coaxing the flowers to grow, and painting the wings of butterflies. The Fly Agaric then became known as a key to this hidden kingdom. Not a vehicle for a grand cosmological journey, but a peephole into the secret magical lives of the spirits of the woods. This is why gnomes and elves are so often depicted alongside it. The mushroom is their accomplice, their signpost, their home. It is the physical manifestation of the enchanting and slightly dangerous magic of the deep woods. This transformation from a sacred tool to a symbol of whimsical folklore was also hastened by the rise of Christianity. As the new religion spread across Europe, it actively suppressed the older pagan nature-based belief systems. Shamanic practices, herbalism, and any communion with nature spirits were recast as witchcraft, as demonic. A mushroom that could alter consciousness and open the mind to other realities was a direct threat to the singular, top-down authority of the church. It offered a personal, ecstatic path to the divine, unmediated by a priest. And so, the Fly Agaric was demonized. It became a toadstool, a name linking it to the supposedly poisonous and malevolent toad. It was associated with sorcery, with poison, with the devil. Its power was not denied, but its source was reframed as evil. Over centuries, this fear and suppression faded, but the original reverence was never fully restored. What was left was a kind of folk memory, a whisper of the mushroom's power, stripped of its spiritual context. It became a mad mushroom, a crazy mushroom, but its connection to a magical world remained. When Victorian illustrators began creating the visual language for fairy tales, they reached for this potent, beautiful, and slightly sinister symbol to represent the world of magic. And so the Amanita muscaria was cemented in our collective imagination as the quintessential fairy tale mushroom, its deep shamanic history in the far north almost entirely forgotten by the cultures that turned it into a whimsical caricature. It is a fascinating journey from a sacred cosmic vehicle to a feared tool of witches to a charming seat for a cartoon gnome. The mushroom never changed, but our stories about it tell us everything about ourselves. From the frozen taiga and the enchanted forests of Europe, our journey now takes an even greater leap, back thousands of years to the hot, dry plains of the Indus Valley in what is now India and Pakistan. Here we search for the mushroom not in folklore or direct observation, but in the cryptic verses of one of humanity's oldest and most sacred texts, the Rig Veda. And in doing so, we enter into one of the most fascinating and contentious debates in the world of ethnobotany, the quest for the identity of a divine intoxicating plant known only as soma. The Rig Veda is a vast collection of hymns composed in Vedic Sanskrit somewhere between 1500 and 1200 BCE. These are not just poems, they are the foundational scriptures of Hinduism, containing prayers, cosmology, and instructions for complex rituals meant to honor and appease the gods. Throughout these hymns, particularly in the 9th book, constant, ecstatic praise is heaped upon a mysterious being called Soma. Soma is both a god and a plant, and a beverage pressed from that plant. The hymns describe it in rapturous terms. Drinking Soma bestowed immortality, divine vision, and superhuman strength upon the drinker. It was the nectar of the gods, a source of inspiration for poets, and a conduit for direct communion with the divine. The god Indra, king of the heavens, is said to have drunk vast quantities of Soma to gain the strength to slay the cosmic serpent Vritra and release the waters to the world. The problem is, the identity of the plant from which Soma was made has been lost to time. For thousands of years, the rituals described in the Rig Veda continued, but a substitute plant, likely with no psychoactive properties, was used in place of the original. The secret of the true Soma was gone. For centuries, scholars and botanists have hunted for it, proposing dozens of candidates, a species of ephedra, a stimulant, Syrian rue, even cannabis. None of them seem to perfectly match the vivid, yet frustratingly vague descriptions in the ancient hymns. Then, in the mid-20th century, an amateur mycologist and banker named R. Gordon Wasson proposed a radical and electrifying theory. Wasson had spent years studying the role of mushrooms in human culture, coining the terms mycophilic, mushroom-loving, and mycophobic, mushroom-fearing, to describe different societies. After his groundbreaking work documenting the ritual use of psilocybin mushrooms in Mexico, he turned his attention to the mystery of Soma. He argued, with incredible passion and a wealth of circumstantial evidence, that Soma was none other than our Fly Agaric, Amanita muscaria. His argument was built like a detective's case, piecing together clues scattered throughout the Vedic hymns. First, he noted that the texts describe Soma as a plant without roots, without leaves, and without seeds. This is a perfect if poetic description of a mushroom, which appears suddenly from the earth and reproduces via spores, not seeds. A flowering plant like ephedra has all of these things. Second, the hymns repeatedly associate Soma with mountains. While the Aryan people who composed the hymns lived on the plains, they spoke of Soma coming from the mountains, brought down to them for their rituals. Amanita muscaria is a mycorrhizal fungus, growing in a symbiotic relationship with trees like birch and pine, which are often found at higher, mountainous altitudes in that region of the world. Third, the descriptions of Soma's appearance are highly suggestive. It is described as ruddy, brilliant, and clothed in a robe of milk. Wasson interpreted this as the brilliant red cap of the Fly Agaric, dotted with the white milky fragments of its universal veil. The pressing of the Soma plant is said to produce a tawny or fulvous juice, which matches the yellowish liquid that can be extracted from the mushroom. Fourth, and perhaps most compellingly, are the descriptions of the effects. The hymns speak of a powerful, intoxicating experience that gave visions, a sense of immense power, and a direct line to the gods. This aligns well with the potent psychoactive journey induced by the Fly Agaric. But it was another, more obscure set of verses that became the linchpin of Wasson's theory, and also the most controversial part. The Rigveda contains passages that seem to describe the gods and the priests drinking soma that has been filtered through a man or an animal. One hymn speaks of priests who urinate the soma. For generations, these verses were interpreted metaphorically by scholars as being about rain or some other abstract cosmic process. Wasson, armed with his knowledge of the Siberian shamanic practices, saw it literally. He argued this was a direct, unambiguous reference to the practice of consuming the urine of a person who had ingested the psychoactive substance, which, as we've seen, is a unique and defining feature of Amanita muscaria consumption. The human body acts as the filter, purifying the soma and passing its essence along. This, for Wasson, was the smoking gun. No other proposed candidate for soma had a logical reason for this strange and specific practice to be mentioned in a sacred text. Wasson's theory, published in his 1968 book Soma, Divine Mushroom of Immortality, was a bombshell. It was both celebrated and heavily criticized. Ethnobotanists and religious scholars pointed out flaws. They argued that the descriptions were too poetic to be taken as botanical fact. They noted that Amanita muscaria can have unpleasant side effects, which don't seem to be mentioned in the ecstatic hymns. They proposed that the urine-drinking verses could still be a metaphor for rain clouds, with Indra being the sky and the urine being the life-giving rain. The debate continues to this day. There is no definitive proof. The archaeological evidence is non-existent, and the texts themselves remain open to interpretation. But Wasson's theory remains incredibly powerful because it provides a single, elegant solution to so many of the puzzles surrounding soma. It explains the plant's form, its mountain origins, its appearance, its powerful effects, and most uniquely, the strange ritual of its secondary consumption. Whether it is true or not, the theory forces us to look at our ancient past with new eyes, to consider the profound and shaping role that psychoactive fungi may have played in the very birth of human religion and myth-making. Could it be that the wellspring of one of the world's oldest religions was a vision granted by this little red and white mushroom? Could the foundation of Vedic cosmology have been revealed in a trance state, in a quiet communion between a human mystic and a fungal teacher? We may never know for sure. The identity of soma remains a sacred mystery, but the quest for it reveals something essential about our relationship with this mushroom. From the Siberian taiga to the Indus Valley, it has been seen not as a simple plant, but as a sacrament, an entheogen, a substance that generates the divine within. It has been a key used to unlock the doors of perception and gaze upon what our ancestors believed was the true nature of reality. This is the deep, ancient legacy of the Fly Agaric. It is so much more than a pop culture icon, more than a pretty but poisonous toadstool. It is a thread woven through the tapestry of human history, a silent partner in the evolution of our spirituality. It has been a guide for the shaman, a trickster for the farmer, and perhaps even a god for the priest. Its scarlet cap, pushing up through the forest floor, has been a recurring question mark in our collective story, a symbol of the profound and beautiful mystery that lies just beyond the veil of our everyday awareness. It reminds us that the line between magic and science, between myth and biology, is sometimes as thin and as fragile as a mushroom's skin. And as we let that thought settle, we can appreciate the immense journey this single organism has taken, not just across continents, but through the vast, uncharted territories of the human mind itself. A silent traveller whose echoes we can still hear today if we only listen closely enough to the old stories. Chapter 3. Down the Rabbit Hole. Carroll, Wonderland, and the Victorian imagination. And perhaps no story echoes with such strange and persistent vibrancy as the one that begins on a golden afternoon, on a riverbank, with a sleepy little girl. It is a story that has become so intertwined with our scarlet-capped mushroom that to think of one is often to conjure the other. We are of course talking about a place called Wonderland, and the quiet, brilliant man who imagined it into being. To understand this connection, we must do as Alice did. We must leave the riverbank, leave the world we know, and tumble down, down, down into the world that created her. Let's travel back in time, not just a few centuries, but into a particular state of mind. We are going to the heart of the 19th century, to Victorian England, and we must try to feel it as a living place. Imagine standing on a London street. The air is thick with the scent of coal smoke and damp wool, a constant hazy perfume that clings to everything. The soundtrack is not the hum of electricity, but a cacophony of iron-shod hooves on cobblestones, the cries of street vendors, the distant, mournful whistle of a steam train pulling into a grand cathedral-like station. It is a world of immense energy, of iron and steam and relentless progress. This was the age of the engineer, the inventor, the industrialist. It felt to the people living in it as though humanity was finally bending the raw materials of the planet to its will. The Great Exhibition of 1851, housed in the magnificent Crystal Palace, was the perfect monument to this feeling. It was a cathedral built of glass and steel, showcasing the manufactured wonders of the world. It was a declaration that there was no problem that human ingenuity, science and industry could not solve. The world was a machine, and the Victorians were learning to read its blueprints. And this mindset extended to the natural world with a ferocious passion. This was the golden age of the collector, the taxonomist, the naturalist. Every self-respecting parlour had a glass case of butterflies pinned in perfect formation, a collection of seashells arranged by size and shape, a fern pressed between the pages of a heavy book. Think of it as a grand, global project of tidying up. Explorers and botanists, fueled by the vast reach of the British Empire, were bringing the world home in specimen jars and Wardian cases. They were naming, classifying, and categorizing every living thing they could find. The impulse was to take the wild, chaotic, sprawling mess of nature and fit it into neat, logical boxes, to draw a line around every species, to give it a Latin name, and to place it on its proper branch in the great tree of life. There was a deep comfort in this, a sense of order being imposed upon a world that had for millennia been a place of mystery and myth. The world, it seemed, was becoming known. It was becoming smaller, tamer. But beneath this gleaming surface of confidence and order, there was a deep and quiet trembling, a profound anxiety. In 1859, a quiet naturalist named Charles Darwin published a book on the origin of species, and with it he did more than just rearrange the branches on the tree of life. He shook its very roots. The idea that life was not a fixed divine creation, but a slow, blind, and often brutal process of struggle and change, was a seismic shock to the Victorian soul. It suggested that humanity was not the divinely appointed pinnacle of creation, but merely another branch on that sprawling, chaotic tree, intimately connected to the apes and the worms and the fungi. This created a spiritual chasm. If the old stories of creation were no longer solid ground, then where did one stand? This tension, this deep conflict between the rational, scientific impulse to measure and classify, and a profound yearning hunger for meaning, for magic, for something more, is the very air that Wonderland breathes. It is a world saturated with a fascination for the unseen. It was an age of spiritualism, of seances in darkened parlours, of people desperate to believe in ghosts and fairies and messages from the great beyond. It was as if the more the material world was explained, the more desperately the imagination pushed back, seeking new territories of the mysterious and the inexplicable. They were cataloguing ferns by day and trying to talk to spirits by night. And it is in this world of beautiful contradictory pressures that we find a man named Charles Lutwidge Dodgson. Let's picture him, a tall, slightly awkward man, deaf in one ear from a childhood fever, with a persistent stammer that he fought his entire life. He is a man of meticulous, almost breathtaking order. By profession, he is a mathematician, and a logician at Christ Church, one of the grandest colleges of Oxford University. His world is one of numbers, of elegant proofs, of Euclidean geometry, where parallel lines never meet, and every problem has a rational, verifiable solution. His rooms are filled with books on algebra and logic. His days are governed by the ringing of college bells, the rhythm of lectures and tutorials, the quiet scholarly life of a bachelor don. He is also an ordained deacon in the Church of England, a man of sincere if quiet faith, navigating his own path through that turbulent spiritual landscape. And he is a pioneer in the new and almost magical art of photography. This was not a simple point-and-shoot affair. It was a complex alchemical process involving heavy cameras, glass plates coated in volatile chemicals, and long still exposures. To be a photographer then was to be part chemist, part artist, part magician, capturing a fleeting moment of light and shadow and fixing it forever on a piece of glass. It required immense patience and precision. Everything about Charles Dodgson's public life speaks of control, of order, of a mind that finds comfort in rules and systems. But this same man, this logician and deacon, called himself Lewis Carroll, and under that name he unlatched a gate in his mind and let loose a torrent of glorious, unadulterated nonsense. The stories he told were not just whimsical, they were a direct assault on the very logic he revered. They were a celebration of the absurd, a playground where the rules of mathematics, language, and social etiquette were gleefully turned upside down and inside out. Imagine him on the river, on that famous golden afternoon in July of 1862. He is rowing a boat with his friend Robinson Duckworth, and his passengers are the 3 young daughters of the college dean, Lorena, Edith, and his favourite 10-year-old Alice Liddell. The air is warm and heavy, buzzing with the sound of insects. The water of the River Isis slides slowly past the banks, and to pass the time, the girls ask for a story. And so Charles Dodgson begins. He begins a story with no nonsense in it. He teases, and then proceeds to create what would become the most famous nonsense in the English language. He doesn't have a plan. He is simply weaving it out of the air, out of the sleepy heat of the day, out of the playful demands of his audience. He sees a white rabbit, perhaps in his mind's eye, or perhaps he just plucks the image from the ether, gives it a waistcoat and a pocket watch, and sends it scurrying down a rabbit hole, and he sends Alice, his character, tumbling in right after it. This is the moment of transition. It is the departure from the sunlit, ordered world of Victorian Oxford, with its predictable riverbanks and its logical dons, into a place that operates on an entirely different set of principles. The fall itself is slow, dreamlike. It is not a terrifying plunge, but a gentle, curious descent past cupboards and bookshelves. It is a journey from the conscious to the subconscious, from the surface world to the subterranean kingdom of the mind. And it is here, in the subterranean dark, that Alice first encounters the magic of transformation. She finds a tiny golden key and a door far too small to fit through, and then a small bottle. On its label, the words "Drink me" are printed in large, beautiful letters. Let's pause here, in this quiet, low hall. Alice is alone. The world she knew is gone. Far above her, at the top of a deep, dark shaft. In her hand is a vessel containing an unknown liquid. In the logical world above, a child would be taught never to drink from an unlabeled bottle. It is a fundamental rule of safety and common sense. But Wonderland, as she is beginning to discover, has no use for common sense. She checks the bottle carefully to see if it is marked poison, a wonderfully childlike and yet deeply Victorian piece of logic. The Victorians were obsessed with poisons. With the rise of industrial chemistry, poisons were more available than ever, and tales of accidental poisonings, as well as more sinister applications, were common in the popular press. So Alice, a proper Victorian child, performs her due diligence. Finding no such warning, she drinks, and the sensation is immediate. Carroll describes it as a taste of cherry tart, custard, pineapple, roast turkey, toffee, and hot buttered toast. It's a cascade of comforting, familiar flavors, a distillation of childhood treats. But the effect is utterly alien. "What a curious feeling," said Alice. "I must be shutting up like a telescope." She shrinks. Her body, the one thing she has always known and been able to rely on, is suddenly no longer a constant. It has become a variable. Her relationship to the world around her is radically altered. The table that was at eye level now towers over her like a skyscraper. The door is now a possibility. This is the first great rupture of the story. The stable, reliable self has been proven unstable. Soon after, trapped and crying a pool of her own giant tears, she finds a small cake marked with the words "Eat me," and this time she grows. She doesn't just return to her normal size, she shoots up uncontrollably until her head hits the ceiling. One moment, she is a tiny, forgotten creature. The next, she is a giant trapped in a doll's house. She is too big, then too small, never ever the right size. For decades, scholars and enthusiasts have pointed to this sequence as the cornerstone of the mushroom theory. The idea is simple and powerfully seductive, that Charles Dodgson, the quiet mathematician, had knowledge of the psychoactive properties of Amanita muscaria, and that Alice's dramatic changes in size are a literary depiction of the micropsia and macropsia, the perceptual distortions of size that can be induced by its chemical compounds. Is it possible? To answer that, we have to look closer, not just at the story, but at the visual world that accompanied it. The first illustrations for Alice were done by Dodgson himself. They are charming but amateurish. For the published version, he commissioned one of the most famous illustrators of the day, John Tenniel, and it is in Tenniel's iconic definitive drawings that the visual connection becomes undeniable. Let us turn the page and follow Alice as she escapes the house of the White Rabbit and runs into a nearby wood. The mood here is different. It is darker, quieter. The trees are gnarled and ancient-looking. She is lost, and still the wrong size, impossibly small. She wishes she could grow larger, and wonders how to do it. And then she comes upon a large mushroom. It is about the same height as herself, and sitting on top of it, calmly smoking a long hookah pipe, is a large blue caterpillar. Here the connection is no longer subtext. It is the centerpiece of the scene. The mushroom is not just any mushroom. In Tenniel's black and white engraving, it is clearly a Fly Agaric, with a thick stem and a broad curved cap. While not explicitly colored scarlet and white, its form is unmistakably that of an Amanita, and the creature sitting upon it is a guru of metamorphosis. The caterpillar's entire existence is a living lesson in radical transformation, from earthbound larva to winged imago. The conversation that follows is one of the most famous in English literature. It is a slow, languid, and deeply frustrating exchange that circles around the question of identity. "Who are you?" asks the caterpillar, and Alice, who has been big and small and everything in between, can only reply, I hardly know, sir. Just at present, at least I know who I was when I got up this morning, but I think I must have been changed several times since then." She has lost her stable sense of self. The caterpillar, enveloped in the smoke from his hookah, an object itself associated with altered states of consciousness, with the exotic and the dreamlike Orient, is utterly unsympathetic. He is the calm, indifferent center of her existential crisis. And when Alice complains about her tiny size, he simply stretches himself up and remarks, "It is a very good height indeed." Finally, as he crawls away, he offers her the key to her problem. The solution is not in a bottle or a cake, but in the very thing he was sitting on. "One side will make you grow taller," he calls out, "and the other side will make you grow shorter." Let's unpack that simple, bizarre instruction. One side, the other side. Of what? A round mushroom cap doesn't have two distinct sides in the way a coin does. Alice is puzzled. She breaks off a piece from each side of the mushroom with her hands. The logic is purely dream logic. It's a magical instruction that one must simply accept. And the mushroom works. Nibbling one piece makes her shrink so violently her chin strikes her foot. Nibbling the other makes her neck stretch out like a serpent, her head rising high above the trees. She has for the first time gained control over the process of transformation. The mushroom is her tool. It is the agent of change, the biological key that allows her to navigate this bewildering new world. The evidence for the Amanita Muscaria theory seems, on the surface, almost overwhelming. We have a story written in an era fascinated by botany and toxicology. We have a central motif of size distortion, a known effect of some psychoactive substances, and we have the iconic image of a caterpillar on a mushroom, providing a direct, almost instructional solution. It's a beautiful, neat and compelling package. But like everything in Wonderland, the closer you look, the more complicated it becomes. We must now do what a good scientist or a good historian does. We must weigh the evidence. We must look for the counter-arguments, the alternative explanations. First, there is the man himself, Charles Dodgson. By all accounts, he was a deeply conventional man in his personal habits. He was a teetotaler who drank water with his meals. There is not a single entry in his voluminous diaries, and he was a meticulous diarist, or his thousands of letters that hints at any personal experience with or even academic interest in hallucinogenic substances. For him to have secretly experimented with a potentially poisonous mushroom seems wildly out of character. So, if he didn't have personal experience, could he have learned about it second-hand? It's possible. The Victorian era was a time of great exploration, and accounts of shamanic practices in Siberia where Amanita muscaria was used ritually were beginning to filter back into Europe. Mordecai Cook, a prominent English mycologist, published a book called The Seven Sisters of Sleep in 1860, just 2 years before the famous boat trip. This book was a popular survey of various soporific plants from around the world, and it contained a detailed chapter on the Fly Agaric, explicitly describing its intoxicating effects and its use by Siberian tribes. He even quotes an earlier traveler describing the effects. The objects around him appear to be either very large or very small. Did Dodgson read Cook's book? We don't know. There's no record of it in his library. But it shows that the knowledge was in the air. An educated, curious man at Oxford, a hub of intellectual life, could certainly have encountered these ideas in journals, magazines, or conversation. He wouldn't have needed to be a psychonaut himself. He would only have needed to be a good listener, a curious reader. But there are other, perhaps more plausible sources of inspiration that have nothing to do with mycology. Let's return to Dodgson the mathematician. In the mid-19th century, mathematics itself was going through a kind of Wonderland-esque transformation. For 2,000 years, geometry had been governed by the strict common-sense rules of Euclid. But mathematicians were beginning to explore bizarre new worlds of non-Euclidean geometry, where parallel lines could meet and the angles of a triangle didn't add up to 180 degrees. They were inventing logical systems that were perfectly consistent internally, but which seemed to defy all physical reality. Does that sound familiar? Wonderland is in many ways a perfect literary representation of such a system. It follows its own absurd logic with absolute rigor. The Mad Hatter's Tea Party is trapped in a loop of time, not because of magic, but because of a logical riddle. The Cheshire Cat fades away until only its grin remains, a perfect abstraction, like a mathematical concept divorced from any physical object. Dodgson was also fascinated by optical toys and illusions. The Victorian parlour was full of thaumatropes, zoetropes, and stereoscopes, devices that played tricks on the eye and the brain, creating illusions of movement and depth. He was a photographer, keenly aware of how a lens could distort perspective, making near things seem huge and far things tiny. The experience of looking through a microscope or a telescope, both instruments that were undergoing rapid improvement and popularization, was another way in which the Victorians were becoming accustomed to the idea that the world was not always as it seemed, and that size was relative to the observer. Alice's shrinking and growing could be seen as a journey through the lenses of these new scientific instruments, from the microscopic to the telescopic and back again. And what about the mushroom itself? It was, and still is, a deeply ingrained part of European folklore. Long before it was analyzed for its chemical compounds, the mushroom was a symbol of the uncanny. It was the food of fairies, the marker of a fairy ring, a mysterious organism that sprang up overnight from the dark, damp earth without seeds or visible roots. Mushrooms belonged to the world of twilight, of the forest, of things that were not entirely plant and not entirely animal. They were profoundly other. For a storyteller wanting to create a portal to a magical world, a mushroom was a very natural and powerful symbol to use, without any need for a pharmacological subtext. It was already loaded with meaning. So where does that leave us? Are we to dismiss the connection entirely? Perhaps not. The beauty of the theory is not that it must be literally true to be meaningful. Lewis Carroll may never have intended for the mushroom to be a direct reference to Amanita muscaria. He may have simply been drawing from a rich soup of cultural and scientific ideas, folklore about fairy rings, new scientific understanding of perception, the logic of dreams, and the simple observable fact that mushrooms are strange and wonderful things. But what art intends, and what it becomes, are often two different things. The story, once released into the world, took on a life of its own, and over the next century, as Western culture began its own explorations into altered states of consciousness, people began to read Alice in a new light. They saw their own experiences of ego dissolution and perceptual distortion reflected in her journey. The story became a map, and the mushroom became the key. Whether Carroll put it there consciously or not almost ceased to matter. The connection had been made in the collective imagination, and it was too powerful to undo. The true magic of Wonderland isn't that it might be a secret drug trip. The magic is in how it perfectly captures the feeling of the world losing its familiar moorings. It's a story about the crisis of identity that happens when the rules you have always trusted suddenly stop working. This is the experience of a child growing up, trying to make sense of the arbitrary and often nonsensical rules of the adult world. It is the experience of a scientist pushing at the boundaries of knowledge and finding that reality is much stranger than it appears. And it is the experience of a society grappling with new ideas that challenge its most fundamental beliefs about God, nature, and itself. The Victorian era was a world struggling with its own sense of scale. The British Empire was growing to an incomprehensible size, while the new sciences of geology and evolution were revealing a timescale of deep time that made a human life shrink to an insignificant speck. The microscope revealed teeming worlds in a drop of water, while the telescope showed that our own world was a tiny mote of dust in a vast cold cosmos. Like Alice, the Victorians were constantly being made to feel impossibly large and terrifyingly small at the same time. Charles Dodgson, the man of logic, gave a voice to the anxiety and the wonder of this feeling. He didn't write a philosophical treatise, he wrote a children's story. He took all the grand, intimidating questions of his time about identity, logic, and the nature of reality, and he filtered them through the clear, curious, and unsentimental eyes of a 10-year-old girl. The mushroom in the story, then, becomes the perfect symbol for this process. It is a natural object that contains a kind of magic, a key to a different way of seeing. It is an agent of transformation that allows Alice to physically experience the philosophical problems that haunt her. It is the catalyst that forces her to question everything, starting with the most basic question of all: who are you? Perhaps the most honest answer is that we will never know for sure what was in Dodgson's mind. His own motivations are as lost to time as the details of that golden afternoon on the river. He was a man who treasured his privacy, who hid his whimsical genius behind a pseudonym and a quiet academic life. The story itself is the only evidence we have, and what the story tells us is that the human imagination is the most powerful hallucinogen of all. It doesn't require any external chemical. It can take the raw materials of its time: a stuffy parlour, a mathematical problem, a Latin lesson, a strange-looking fungus on a forest floor, and it can weave them into a world more vivid and enduring than reality itself, a world that feels, even now, over a century and a half later, profoundly and strangely true. The journey through Wonderland is a journey into the intricate, brilliant, and sometimes frightening landscape of a single human mind, a mind that was itself a perfect product of its fascinating and contradictory age. The mushroom did not need to be ingested to have an effect. It just needed to be seen, to be wondered about. It was a prompt, a seed, and in the fertile soil of Lewis Carroll's imagination, it grew into something vast and strange and utterly unforgettable. It became a door, not into a physical hallucination, but into a story. And that story has in turn become a permanent room in the architecture of our own minds, a place we can all visit whenever we feel the need to see the world grow a little bit stranger and a little more wonderful. And so we leave Alice, for a moment, with the pieces of the mushroom in her hands, holding the power of transformation, ready to continue her journey through a world where logic has gone on holiday, and everything, absolutely everything, is possible. The quiet woods of Wonderland hold their breath, waiting to see what size she will choose to be next. Chapter 4. The Chemistry of Delirium, Ibotenic Acid, Muscimol, and the Brain. And what a choice it is, to grow larger, to shrink smaller. A decision made by taking a bite from one side of a mushroom cap or the other. For Alice, it is a simple matter of culinary selection. For us, here in the quiet of the real world, the secret to this impossible transformation isn't a matter of which side you eat, but of chemistry. It's a story not of magic, but of molecules. A story of a subtle, silent metamorphosis that happens long before the mushroom ever reaches the lips, a change that unlocks the door to Wonderland from within our very own minds. To understand how a simple fungus can bend the ruler of reality, we must first look at the mushroom itself as it sits in the quiet forest, patiently holding its secrets within. Freshly picked, the Amanita Muscaria is a beautiful but somewhat deceptive vessel. The primary compound it holds in its bright red tissues is a molecule called ibotenic acid. Think of ibotenic acid as a key, but a key that hasn't quite been finished. It's a blank full of potential, but its shape isn't quite right for the most important locks in the human brain. On its own, ibotenic acid has its own effects on our neurochemistry, but they are often described as less profound, more jarring, and sometimes physically unpleasant. It is an excitatory compound, a stimulant to the nervous system, a state of being that is less like a dream and more like a fever. It is the raw material, the unopened letter, the promise of a journey not yet begun. The real secret, the true chemical protagonist of our story, is waiting to be born from it. Nature, in its patient wisdom, has arranged for a simple and elegant transformation. The process that turns this raw potential into the key to Wonderland is called decarboxylation. It sounds complex, like something from a sterile laboratory, but in truth, it is one of the most ancient and gentle forms of chemistry. It is simply the process of removing a small part of the ibotenic acid molecule, a carboxyl group, using little more than time and warmth. When the mushroom is carefully dried, whether by the gentle heat of a low oven, the patient gaze of the sun, or the simple passage of weeks in a dry room, a quiet alchemy takes place. With a subtle shift in its atomic structure, the ibotenic acid sheds this tiny piece of itself and becomes something new. It becomes Muscimol. This transformation is everything. It is the difference between a state of agitated confusion and one of profound, dreamlike delirium. Muscimol is the finished key. It is the molecule that fits. Where ibotenic acid excites the nervous system, Muscimol does the very opposite. It is a calming agent of immense and unusual power. It is the chemical that whispers to the brain, telling it to slow down, to quiet itself, to let the normal rules of perception fall away like autumn leaves. This gentle process of drying, this patient waiting, is the first and most critical step. It is the folk wisdom embedded in nearly every culture that revered this mushroom. They knew through generations of trial and error that the fresh mushroom was unpredictable, but the dried one held the spirit of the dream. They were, without knowing the terms, practicing a kind of slow natural chemistry, coaxing the muscimol from its slumber within the ibotenic acid. So now, Let us imagine this journey has been completed. The mushroom has been dried, the molecular shift has occurred, and the muscimol is present, stable and waiting. When it is ingested, it begins the next stage of its voyage, a passage not through the forest, but through the intricate internal landscape of the human body. It navigates the digestive system and is absorbed into the bloodstream, becoming one of countless molecules flowing through the vast network of our circulation. It is now a traveler, carried on the pulsing red river, on a mission to a very specific and well-guarded destination, the brain. The brain, for all its wondrous activity, is an incredibly sensitive and protected organ. It cannot allow just any passing molecule from the bloodstream to wander into its delicate neural pathways. To protect itself, it has a remarkable defense system known as the blood-brain barrier. You can picture this barrier as the ultimate gatekeeper, a highly selective border crossing that separates the turbulent chemistry of the body from the serene, controlled environment of the central nervous system. For a molecule to pass through this gate, it must have the right credentials, the right size, the right chemical passport. Most substances are turned away, denied entry into the sacred city of consciousness. But Muscimol is a privileged traveler. Its structure is such that the gatekeepers of the blood-brain barrier recognize it, or something like it, and grant it passage. It slips through this microscopic checkpoint with ease, leaving the bustling traffic of the bloodstream behind and entering the quiet humming realm of the mind. And it is here, inside the brain, that the true story unfolds. It is here that Muscimol reveals its extraordinary purpose. To understand what it does, we must first understand the brain's fundamental rhythm, the constant interplay between go signals and stop signals. The brain is a symphony of electrical impulses, of neurons firing in complex, cascading patterns. The go signals are called excitatory neurotransmitters. They tell neurons to fire, to pass on a message, to take action. They are the accelerator pedals of the mind. But just as important, if not more so, are the stop signals. These are the inhibitory neurotransmitters. Their job is to tell neurons not to fire, to be quiet, to rest. They are the brake pedal. Without them, the brain would be in a constant state of seizure, a storm of unchecked activity, an engine redlining until it breaks. The most important, most widespread inhibitory neurotransmitter in the entire mammalian nervous system is a substance called GABA, which stands for gamma-aminobutyric acid. GABA is the brain's universal peacemaker. It is the great calmer, the whisper of hush that prevents chaos. When you feel calm, when you are relaxed, when you are falling into a deep and peaceful sleep, it is GABA that is primarily at work, gently pressing the brakes on your neural activity. It does this by fitting into specific receptors on the surface of your neurons, like a key fitting into a lock. These are called GABA-A receptors. When GABA locks into its receptor, it opens a channel that allows negatively charged ions to flow into the neuron, making it less likely to fire. It hyperpolarizes the cell, which is a technical way of saying it convinces it to take a break. It turns down the volume on the brain's chatter. Now imagine Muscimol arriving in this delicate, perfectly balanced system. Muscimol is what scientists call a potent agonist of the GABA-A receptor. But let's translate that into a more tangible image. Muscimol is a master of molecular mimicry. It is an imposter, a brilliant forger. By a stunning coincidence of evolutionary chemistry, its three-dimensional shape is almost identical to the shape of the brain's own GABA molecule. It is so similar, in fact, that it can slide into the GABA-A receptor just as easily as the real thing. It's like a skeleton key that fits one of the most important locks in the entire palace. But it doesn't just fit the lock. It turns it with more authority than the original key. When Muscimol binds to the GABA-A receptor, it doesn't just tell the neuron to quiet down. It holds the off switch down with incredible force and for a much longer duration than GABA itself would. It is a superagonist. It amplifies the brain's natural stop signal to an extraordinary degree. This is the fundamental mechanism, the very heart of the Amanita Muscaria experience, and it is profoundly different from what are often called the classic psychedelics, like psilocybin from other mushrooms or LSD. Those substances primarily interact with the serotonin system, one of the brain's go signals, adding new information, creating connections that weren't there before, and turning up the volume on sensory input. Muscimol does the opposite. It doesn't add information, it selectively removes it. It doesn't turn the volume up, it begins a process of turning everything systematically down. The result is not a simple state of sedation, not just sleepiness. That would be too simple for such a fabled mushroom. Instead, what happens is a global but uneven suppression of neural activity. Imagine a bustling city at noon, full of traffic, people talking, construction, a million sounds at once. That is your normal waking brain. Now imagine a strange heavy snow begins to fall, a magical snow that muffles sound, but it doesn't fall evenly. In some neighborhoods it falls so thickly that all sound is completely absorbed, and the streets become silent and still. In other areas, the snow is lighter, muffling some sounds but allowing others to come through, now sounding strangely clear and significant in the surrounding quiet. This is what Muscimol does to the brain. It quiets the entire landscape, but the quieting is patchy, inconsistent. This uneven dampening of the brain's activity is what gives rise to the characteristic delirium. The parts of our brain responsible for executive function, our ability to plan, to reason, to maintain a consistent train of thought, are among the first to be hushed. The relentless inner monologue that narrates our daily lives begins to sputter and fade. Logic, as Alice so aptly discovered, goes on holiday. Thoughts may begin to loop, repeating themselves like a skipping record, as the neural circuits that would normally move the thought along are temporarily taken offline. The sense of self, that stable feeling of I that sits at the center of our experience, begins to dissolve. This is dissociation, the feeling of watching your own life from a distance, as if it were a film. The boundary between the dreamer and the dream becomes porous and eventually vanishes altogether. And it is within this dreamlike dissociated state that the truly Wonderland-esque phenomena begin to manifest. The most famous of all, of course, is the distortion of size. Macropsia, the sensation of objects appearing enormous, and micropsia, the sensation of them appearing tiny. Alice eats one side of the mushroom and shoots up like a telescope until her head is among the trees. She eats the other and shrinks so small she is afraid she might go out altogether, like a candle. This is not mere literary fantasy. It is a documented, if rare, neurological symptom, and it finds its roots in the quieting storm of GABA agonism. Our perception of size and space is not a simple direct reading of the world. It is a complex calculation, an ongoing construction project managed primarily by a region of the brain called the parietal lobe, working in close concert with the visual cortex. This part of the brain is our internal surveyor, our geometer. It constantly takes raw data from our eyes and integrates it with information about our own body's position, our memories of how large objects should be, and the rules of perspective. It builds for us, from moment to moment, a stable, predictable three-dimensional world. But when Muscimol floods these regions, it begins to silence the neurons responsible for these intricate calculations. The surveyor's tools begin to malfunction. The brain's internal ruler, the one it uses to measure the world, starts to bend and warp. The constant feedback loops that confirm yes, that tree is far away and therefore appears small, or yes, this teacup is close and therefore appears large, begin to break down. Without this constant stable frame of reference, the brain starts to make mistakes. And these are not small mistakes. They are profound, fundamental errors in judgment. A small object on a table might suddenly be perceived as monumental, its details looming with impossible clarity, because the part of the brain that would normally scale it down has been quieted. This is macropsia. Conversely, an entire room, a person, a landscape might suddenly seem to be a miniature model, a doll's house, impossibly distant and small, as the scaling mechanisms fail in the opposite direction. This is macropsia. For the person experiencing this, it is not an illusion in the typical sense. It is not like looking at an optical puzzle. The brain, with all its authority, is reporting that the world has changed size. The experience is utterly, compellingly real. Alice's journey is not just a metaphor. It is a surprisingly accurate description of a brain experiencing a temporary, chemically induced failure of its ability to process scale. She has in effect taken a bite of a compound that temporarily silences the geometer in her mind. This deep disruption extends beyond just the visual. The sense of time, another of the brain's great constructions, also begins to unravel. Our perception of time's flow is managed by a complex network of different brain regions, including the cerebellum and the basal ganglia. As Muscimol's influence spreads, quieting neurons in these areas, the internal clock can slow to a crawl or race ahead. Minutes can feel like hours, and hours can pass in what feels like a single dreamlike instant. The steady, reliable metronome of our lives is replaced by a strange, elastic rhythm. There are also distinct physical effects. The cerebellum, located at the back of the brain, is crucial for coordinating movement and balance. As Muscimol dampens the activity here, it can lead to a loss of coordination, a feeling of being clumsy and disconnected from one's own limbs. It can also lead to muscular spasms, twitches and jerks, as the fine-tuned control between inhibitory and excitatory signals in the motor system is thrown off balance. These involuntary movements are a common feature in historical accounts and clinical reports, the body itself beginning to move to the strange, stuttering rhythm of its altered neurochemistry. As the experience progresses, the traveler may fall into a profound and vivid dreaming state, often while still appearing to be awake. This is a state where the boundaries are completely gone. The internal world of the subconscious is projected outwards, overlaying itself upon reality, or replacing it entirely. It is a true delirium, a waking dream, where the narrative of the mind, freed from the constraints of logic and sensory validation, can spin tales of incredible beauty or bewildering confusion. Ancient stories of shamans flying, of conversing with spirits, or of traveling to other worlds find a plausible neurological home here. They are not traveling through the forest. They are traveling through the denetworked landscapes of their own minds, a world where anything is possible because the systems that define the impossible have been told to rest. And eventually, after hours of this strange journey, the body begins its work of cleaning up. Enzymes in the liver begin to break down the Muscimol molecules, processing them and tagging them for removal. Interestingly, a significant portion of the Muscimol passes through the body unmetabolized and is excreted in the urine. This is the scientific basis for the widely reported, and to us bizarre, historical practice of urine drinking among certain Siberian tribes. The urine of someone who had consumed the mushroom would still contain active Muscimol and could be consumed by another person to induce a similar state. It was, in essence, a form of recycling a sacred molecule, a practice born of scarcity and a deep understanding of the mushroom's properties however they came by it. As the Muscimol is slowly cleared from the GABA receptors, its grip on the brain's off switches begins to loosen. The city of the mind slowly awakens from its strange silent snow. The surveyor in the parietal lobe finds their tools again. The world gradually settles back into its proper proportions. The internal metronome finds its steady beat. The sense of self, the familiar I, coalesces once more. The final stage of the journey is often a period of profound, deep, and dreamless sleep. This is perhaps the most logical conclusion of all. After hours of having its primary inhibitory system so powerfully stimulated, the brain simply succumbs to the most natural expression of GABA's function. It sleeps, it rests, it resets. Upon waking, the memories of the experience can often be fragmented, hazy, like a dream that you can only recall in fleeting, brilliant snapshots. The narrative logic is gone, but the emotional and visual intensity remains. And so, we arrive back where we started. We have traveled from a molecule born of gentle heat, through the bloodstream, past the brain's vigilant guardians and into the very mechanism of consciousness itself. We have seen how this molecular imposter, this skeleton key, can systematically dismantle our perception of reality, not by adding chaos, but by selectively enforcing silence. The story of Alice, the girl who changes size, who speaks with baffling creatures, who operates in a world where logic is turned on its head, is no longer just a fairy tale. It is a stunningly prescient piece of literature. It is a story that, whether by intention or by incredible coincidence, maps the subjective effects of Ibotenic delirium with almost clinical precision: the shrinking and growing, the dreamlike conversations, the loss of self-identity. Who are you? Asked the caterpillar. The arbitrary and looping rules of the world, all of these find a direct echo in the modern scientific understanding of what happens when Muscimol quiets the brain. The mad mushroom, it turns out, is not so much mad as it is a master of tranquility, applying its peacemaking message so forcefully that the brain's beautiful, orderly symphony falls into a strange and wondrous disarray. It reveals that our stable reality is a fragile consensus, an ongoing agreement among trillions of neurons, an agreement that can be paused by a single elegant molecule. It shows us that beneath the firmament of our waking mind, there is a wonderland, a place of bizarre possibility, waiting not in a rabbit hole, but in the quiet chemical spaces between our own thoughts. And we can leave our journey here, with a newfound respect for the intricate dance of chemistry that makes our reality possible, and for the simple fungus that holds the key to showing us what it's like when that dance changes its rhythm, and the world, just for a little while, grows a little bit stranger and a little more wonderful.